My name is Sam Kiley. I'm the Senior International Correspondent for CNN based in Abu Dhabi. I've been a journalist since 1987 with a 3-year gap when I was at university. I was on the Times, the Evening Standard, briefly, Channel 4 for 10 years making documentaries, and then I joined Sky I think in 2010, and I've been at CNN 2.5 years. And I've covered, I'm probably get what's known as a war correspondent, but it's not a term I would ever use. And I've specialised effectively in Africa, the Balkans, the Middle East, Afghanistan, Pakistan.
Which conflict zones did you work in, and which made the most lasting impact?
Well, the most overwhelmingly horrific is obviously Rwanda, where 1 million people were killed in the space of 3 months. In terms of making a lasting impact, if you ask anybody in the world what happened in Rwanda in 1994, you'll be met with a blank stare, which is deeply disappointing for those of us who covered it, and shameful. It's like not knowing what the Holocaust is. Even well-educated people don't really know. They mix up the names of the people who are victims and the perpetrators and things like that, in broad terms, the tribal groups. So, but I mean, in terms of conflicts I've covered so many. They all have made different impacts in different ways. I mean, the kind of American invasion in Iraq but during the early stages of that, I got abducted and nearly murdered. So that made a personally pretty profound impact. Intellectually, the civil war in Somalia was a defining experience because it really taught us who were covering it how it was that local belligerents made money out of war, and how very rapidly civil wars in particular become money-making enterprises in their own right. Exist at all.
And how did you feel reporting on the conflict? So if you speak specifically of Rwanda, and that had the most lasting impact, how did you actually feel like in the situation?
Covering any conflict is pretty frightening. In the case of Rwanda, I was the first journalist to go in with the people doing the killing, which I managed to do the first time with the help of a Franciscan priest from Croatia who's since been murdered, Vjeko Kuric, who smuggled me in. I found, though, a strange form of confidence in that I realised that in a lot of cases the Interahamwe, the Hutu militias who were doing the killing, often assumed that I was a French paratrooper, and they had gotten used to being on the same side as the French, and so would often mistake me for an ally, and therefore I could travel through roadblocks or kind of actually even kind of command them in a way, order them to open the roadblocks, and just by just getting out and being sort of confident and appearing to be French, and just by bluffing, basically.
Okay, so but when you were watching everything that was happening, how did it make you feel? Like, obviously scared, but did you ever... Well, let me actually... Was there ever times that you couldn't cope when you were actually watching it and reporting on it?
No, I mean, I don't... I think that... there are times that will live with one forever where one was unable to intervene to prevent something terrible happening to somebody. And so I saw in Rwanda people murdered in front of me, and it would have been impossible to have stopped them. And so that leaves one feeling permanently guilty, as indeed it should. In terms of an inability to cope emotionally at the time, no, I don't think I've ever been in that situation. I've certainly been scared out of my wits. I've certainly been sickened to my stomach. I've certainly been profoundly horrified and shaken. and spooked, I mean, it should be profoundly upsetting, and it should scar you if you've got any humanity at all. And you should have thought about that before you get there. I have seen occasionally people who kind of freak out because it turns out to be real life. I'm pleased to say they're in a microscopic minority, and I have nothing but contempt for them. It's not a fucking game.
Yeah. Were there any times where you maybe could have helped intervene and stop something, but you didn't because of your job?
No, and I would have no respect for somebody who said, "Oh, I'm just a disinterested observer, so I can't move in to prevent something happening." Indeed, you should be able to use your role as a disinterested observer to prevent immediate the immediate hurting of people. That doesn't mean you have to start an NGO and start feeding large numbers of people, but when you see, particularly an act of violence, and this is common practice, it's very easy to kind of feel, once you've got a little bit of experience, even in the moment, whether or not people are actually committing violence for the cameras or bullying people because they're showing off in front of a camera, or the presence of foreigners and journalists is an exciting audience that makes matters worse. And so very rapidly you learn to put your camera down and walk away at bare minimum. In the case of incidents, one or two incidents I saw in Rwanda, the only result in an attempt to interfere by me would have been my decapitation. So I didn't. But that was only out of self-interest, which is why it quite rightly leaves me feeling guilty, because I might have been wrong in my calculation. But no, there is. I mean, any journalist who says that we shouldn't intervene in those circumstances is morally and professionally bankrupt.
Okay. And has it ever affected you long term or short term necessarily? Like the feeling of how you felt then, like post-traumatic
Oh,
stress?
yeah, I mean, without going into kind of psychobabble, certainly through the 90s and the early 2000s, being exposed to very, very, very large volumes of deeply violent experiences, both mortally threatening to oneself and fatal to others, which included, in my case, being shot and being abducted on separate occasions, but covering Sierra Leone, Liberia, Somalia, Rwanda, any number of civil wars, being bombed, blown up, shot at, having had friends killed. Yeah, it definitely has, I would say, medium term, in my case, effects, and I think it should do.
And how about your colleagues? Do you have any colleagues that maybe have had to either quit their job, or have you ever had any that have gone to join NGOs or any?
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult to know why. I mean, in some cases, I've had one or two gone kind of mad. Some have disappeared into a bottle. Others have disappeared into a bottle and carried on. Some, for professional reasons, have gone on to leave the profession of journalism and gone to work for NGOs or UN. Some have given it up altogether. I know one or two who've given it up as a direct result of overexposure to violence. In conflict zones, the heavy presence of the correspondent is in danger of being perceived to be distracting at best.
And do you feel like you have ever wanted to give up or change profession?
Well, in the sense that I have never wanted to be identified. I've made a conscious decision not to identify myself as a conflict journalist at the kind of peak of my journalistic my conflict journalistic period. And I'm pleased to say I don't get identified that way so much anymore. I'm simply identified as somebody, I hope, who turns up in places and does their job. But I no longer make it. I no longer wear that mantle psychologically. And then I can't remember a particular. There wasn't a particular moment, but it was also a professional decision, and a decision based on seeing some of my colleagues who had not managed that self-identification very well.
Okay. What is the value of reporting suffering and violence from overseas for a domestic audience that doesn't necessarily know the context?
That therein lies one of the skills in journalistic storytelling. There should be a way. You have to assume a level of knowledge in the general population, but you should be able to do every piece as a discrete, self-contained piece that has the context built in. I mean, yeah, if
the value is of your type of reporting.
Well, I think it's something that we question all the time, but what we hope in my kind of field is to call to account. So you've done a service to the viewer or reader because you've enlightened them about what is going on in other parts of the world, and people are intelligent creatures and they have brains, highly complex mental processes, and they will fit that piece of knowledge into their own brain libraries and draw and links to all kinds of things that one as a journalist might not be aware of, but you're helping to inform their relationship and understanding of the wider world, whether it's what's happening in the village next door to them or in a village on the other side of the planet. They may well see parallels in their own lives, or be completely alienated, or wish to do something about it and raise money.
Did you feel like it does make a difference, or do you just hope it makes a difference? Because you're saying, oh, I hope it does, but do you feel like to any extent it does?
I mean, sometimes it's disappointing that you think you know, something like covering the Rwandan genocide, it didn't stop as a result of being exposed in the media, but there was actually a tiny number of people in the media covering it. And then there was very little done, indeed, in spite of what we were writing at the time, to deal with the inevitable consequences of what flowed from that, which was a war in the Democratic Republic of the Congo that involved 9 countries for many, many years, arguably still going on. So, there are disappointments, but broadly speaking, one is motivated at a spiritual and professional level to try and make things better. But make no mistake, it's bloody good fun, and it's damn sexy.
And would you have any interview tips? Any tips for anyone else entering the field to be an international reporter in the conflict zone? Maybe not specifically in conflict zone, but if they happen to.
Yeah, do your reading. Learn your history. Don't go anywhere before you've done some above average historical study of the history of where you're going. No present makes any sense without a sense of history. And listen. And make yourself useful to the grown-up journalists who you're local or foreign that you find on the ground, and suck their blood dry.
Okay, great. That's all of the questions. That was really good.